Hey makeup friends, it is time for another eye swatch video. This time we are looking at the Cool Matte Obsessions palette from Huda Beauty. They've also released a Warm Matte Obsessions, but I didn't pick that one up, so don't have swatches of that one for you. All right, so this palette retails for $41 Canadian or $32 US, and it is cruelty-free. On the Sephora website, it's not listed as being limited edition, but I would point out that a lot of these Obsessions palettes that have been released from Huda have been discontinued, so God only knows what the timeline would be, but I imagine at some point these will be replaced in their line. It is fragrance-free, and it's also free of parabens, mineral oil, formaldehydes, and phthalates. The palette consists of 9 shades. There are 7 powder shadows, and then there are 2 that are cream to powder formula. And when I first swatched it and played with it, that cream shadow was, like, the 2 of them were beautiful. They're almost wet enough that your bristles get a little bit damp, but they really do transform into a powder on the eyes. Unfortunately, they crease really badly. So I did wear just the 2 cream shadows to work yesterday, and I did pat a shimmer shadow very lightly on top. And I would say within about 3 hours or so, pictures coming up here, it had creased, particularly on the right-hand side there. That's the eye that has more folding to it. It's slightly more hooded than my other eye. You can see that it had creased right up into a dark line there, and then it just sort of scattered from the center of my eye. Now, if you don't have hooded eyes, perhaps you would have a better result from it, but I think just the motion of blinking and opening your eyes, closing your eyes, things like that, these shadows or these cream shadows just don't have the longevity that I would want from them. And just so that you're aware, I did use a concealer as primer for this video. So I used the concealer from The Ordinary, and I had set it with just a very slight amount of loose powder. So I did that between every swatch that I have going on here, just so you're aware. So the cream shadow, I haven't had an opportunity to try it with like a glitter glue as a base. I'm not super optimistic about them. They are beautiful, but if you're really looking for a palette that has this kind of color story, and you do really want to rely on the cream shadows either on their own or to boost the pigmentation of the shadows on top of it, I don't know that this is the one that I would recommend for that. I would recommend the Patrick Ta Major Dimensions 2 palette because it does have very similar vibes to this one in terms of its overall color story. That one has half matte and half shimmer, so you get a little bit more versatility in that sense. But it does come at a price that's much higher. So that one retails for $70 US, whereas this one is $32. Now, having said that, these actual powder shadows are beautiful. They're, as you can see, as I'm doing these eye swatches, there's really no patchiness. They blend beautifully. This is just one application. You will see as we go through this video on the really light shadows, I did go in with a second application, and you'll see that as we get to them, just to build the color up, just to see how pigmented I could get those. I was trying to be a little bit more gentle on my eyes, so I didn't do that with every shadow, but these do build up nicely. The blendability is there, and these are the kind of colors that I love because I've said this a million times, they make my eyes look incredibly green. So, you know, if you can sort of put aside the 2 cream to powder shadows, there's still 7 that are beautiful to work with. So there is that. Now, in terms of the actual versatility of this palette, on the Sephora website, it's described as being for like a minimalist monochromatic eye look. Certainly you're not going to get a wide variety because you're only dealing with matte finishes. So there's no shimmer that you can use to transform the shades underneath them, anything of that sort. But I was drawn to this one just basically because of the color story. Again, I love those kind of cranberry, mauvey kind of shades. I do find it really funny that there are only 9 shadows in here, and yet 2 of them have the same name. Like, it's neither here nor there. I honestly don't care about the names of shadows, but I just find it funny that there are 2 that are labeled as muted pink. I think maybe just a little bit of creativity could have gone into that. Again, it does not take away from the performance of the shadows at all, but I just found it funny that there's only 9 shades and we couldn't come up with something better than muted pink for 2 of them. Regardless, as you can see, this is a beautiful like transition kind of shade. It would be really great for blending out some of the deeper shades as well to establish a nice gradient. And this deepest shade in the palette is beautiful as well. Again, there's no patchiness. It looks like it's applying a bit more like a cream, but this one is a powder. And I'm impressed with the blendability of these shadows. And I do like that you can build up the pigmentation of them, but they don't go on like spotty. They don't blend away into nothing. They're not so pigmented that when you first apply them, you have to spend forever blending, or they just adhere and don't blend. So overall, the powder shadows I'm a fan of in this. In editing this video, in doing the swatches and playing with this, I'm going to go back to the point of the versatility. I don't think there's a lot of difference between the tones of some of these shades. Like, it's more like a nuanced difference rather than 9 completely separate shades, if that makes sense. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing. It really depends on your preferences, how you like to apply your makeup, things of that sort. So for me, I'm not overly upset about it. It's only 9 pans. If it was like a 14 pan palette where there was a lot of overlap, I think that would irritate me even more. I think it's good for blending. I think you can do a really good gradient when there are shades that are very similar to each other, but off by a few degrees of depth, if you will. This shadow here, while I would not actually wear this all over my lid, this shadow can be a really good inner corner highlighter. It could also be really good for just putting on that inner portion of the lid to add some brightness while you have a deeper shadow towards the outside. So I'm not upset that this one is almost a white. It is a very, very light pink, and I think it plays in nicely, and it has a role in here. So going back to my point of versatility, I personally, because of how I like to do my makeup and how I like to blend the edges out and get as smooth of a blend as I can, I actually like that the shades are very similar to each other. I do think that this could have been like a 5-pan palette and could have been perfectly fine on its own. Omit the cream shadows. I see where they're going with it, but they did not deliver on the performance. And I think you could have a really great 5-pan palette with this. In fact, I'd really like to see her do a series of 5-pan palettes. There's something about 5 pans that's it just hits my sweet spot. 3 is too little, 4 is workable, 5 just takes you over that like feeling of being trapped by your palette where you can only do 1 or 2 looks. Of course, it all depends on the shades that are in here, but regardless, I think that these could have been pared down, and I'd be curious to see Huda Beauty release 5-pan palettes. What I will say though, as I'm editing, I can see all the little media clips that I've added into this video, and the picture of the Warm Mattes palette came up, or I'm staring at. And I'm really glad that she managed to not put anything pink related in the Warm Mattes Obsession palette. First of all, it would be really silly to do when there's this Cool Mattes, which is all pink and purple based, but it doesn't seem to matter for Huda. She always seems to have 1 pink at least, and at least with the warm ones, if you're tired of the pinks, there is no pink element to that palette. Again, like I said, did not pick that one up, but it's the same idea where it has the 7 powders and the 2 creams, and I can only imagine that it performs the same way as this one. So to summarize my thoughts on these palettes, I don't think that they are must-haves by any stretch. I can't sit here and say run, don't walk. I am happy with the palette. There is some disappointment there, but not enough for me to want to return it or to think that I'm never going to use it. I most definitely will, but I will likely avoid the cream shadows unless I can figure out a way to make them last longer than just a few hours. So with all of that said, thank you for taking the time to watch, and I will see you in my next video. Until then, just be a decent human being. Bye for now.